You think the kings in your history books were noble, wise, and dignified. Think again. Some smelled so bad they could clear a throne room before they even walked in. Some believed they were made of glass and wore iron rods in their clothes, so they wouldn't shatter. One drowned hundreds of women in a single night. Another made his dog a government minister. One played with dolls until 3 a.m. and forced his queen to join in. A king once died laughing at a bad deer joke. Another ate himself to death after 14 cream buns. One emperor drank mercury to live forever and died from it. And the most infamous of them all, he was so obese, his palace floors had to be reinforced, and so rotten that when he died, his coffin burst open and dogs licked up what was left. This isn't the history you learned in school. This is the part they hid, because once you know what these rulers really did, you'll never look at power the same way again, and you'll realize madness wasn't the exception. It was the rule. The smell hit the ambassadors before they even entered the throne room. It was like someone had died, been left in the sun for a week, then marinated in a mixture of rotten eggs and human waste. But no one had died. That was just how King James I of England smelled on a good day. This man, who literally commissioned the Bible that millions still read today, hadn't bathed in years. His tongue was too big for his mouth, so he drooled constantly. His clothes were so infested with lice that courtiers could see them jumping around like tiny acrobats. And here's the kicker. He was one of the more normal kings I'm about to tell you about. See, when you give someone absolute power, a golden throne, and an army of yes-men whose only job is to tell them how awesome they are, they don't become wise philosopher kings. They become the weirdest, most deranged lunatics history has ever produced. I'm talking about kings who literally thought they were made of glass, queens who ate themselves into shapes that required custom geometric coffins, emperors who tried to make their horses senators, and that last one. That's not even a metaphor for modern politics, though honestly it might as well be. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through the absolute freak show that was medieval and ancient royalty. These are the 11 rulers whose habits were so bizarre, so completely unhinged, that they make modern celebrities look like paragons of normalcy. And trust me, after hearing about a king who died laughing at a joke about a deer, you'll never complain about your weird co-worker again. Let's start with number 11 because we need to ease into this insanity, and Charles V of France is actually one of the tamer entries on this list. This French king suffered from what he called glass delusions. He literally believed he was made of glass and would shatter if anyone touched him. Picture this, the King of France, one of the most powerful men in medieval Europe, walking around with iron rods sewn into his clothing to prevent himself from breaking. He refused to let anyone touch him. He wouldn't sit down too quickly. Sometimes he'd forget he was even king, and his servants would have to remind him, "Your Majesty, you have a council meeting." "I do." "Why?" "Because you're the king." "Oh, right. That's the weird part." This wasn't even that unusual for the time. Glass delusions were like the medieval version of thinking you're allergic to Wi-Fi. Multiple nobles had it. There was even a term for it, scholar's melancholy. Apparently, if you thought too hard in the Middle Ages, your brain just decided you were made of glass, which honestly explains a lot about medieval decision-making. But at least Charles V's delusion was just sad. Number 10 on our list, Peter III of Russia had habits that were straight up embarrassing. This grown man, the emperor of all Russia, still played with dolls, not collecting them as a hobby, actually playing with them, making little voices, creating elaborate storylines, the whole 9 yards. And we're not talking about doing this in private. He'd force his wife, yeah, the future Catherine the Great, and his entire court to play with him until 2 or 3 in the morning. Imagine being one of the most powerful women in Russia, and your husband is making you voice a toy soldier at 2 a.m. Come on, Catherine. Make the cavalry charge sound nay. Nay. No wonder she allegedly had him assassinated. I mean, officially he died of hemorrhoidal colic, which is a fancy way of saying his butt hurt so bad it killed him. But come on, your husband makes you play with dolls every night and then conveniently dies of extreme butt pain. That's not a coincidence, that's a motive. Peter also had a weird obsession with Prussia. He dressed in Prussian military uniform and spoke German instead of Russian, and once freed a rat from execution because it reminded him of a Prussian soldier. Yes, you heard that right. The rat had eaten through his toy soldiers, so Peter court-martialed it. Full military trial for a rodent. But then he decided the rat showed proper Prussian discipline in its knowing technique, and pardoned it. This is your brain on absolute power, folks. Quick favor, if you're enjoying these absolutely unhinged historical facts that definitely weren't in your textbook, smash that like button. It really helps other people discover just how weird history actually was. Number 9 brings us to Farouk of Egypt. And this guy took the concept of sticky fingers to a whole new level. King Farouk was a kleptomaniac, but not just any kleptomaniac, a pickpocketing kleptomaniac king. This man had unlimited wealth, owned multiple palaces, had a collection of over 1,000 expensive suits. And what did he do for fun? He picked pockets. Winston Churchill once left a meeting with Farouk and realized his watch was missing. The king had stolen it. During state dinners, guests would leave missing wallets, jewelry, even medals. Farouk had actually trained himself in the art of pickpocketing. He called it the hand of the thief and was apparently quite good at it. Imagine being so bored with unlimited power that you take up crime as a hobby. But the pickpocketing was just the tip of the iceberg. Farouk was obsessed with all things red. He owned hundreds of red cars and gave orders that no one else in Egypt could own a red car. If he saw one, he'd have it confiscated and added to his collection. He once shot out the tires of a red car that tried to pass his convoy. The driver turned out to be a diplomat. International incident? Nah, just Tuesday for King Farouk. He also had the world's largest pornography collection, which he insisted was for educational purposes. Sure, buddy. That's why you need 10,000 items for education. He was so fat that he required a reinforced bed and a special chair. When he sat down at restaurants, they'd have to remove the arms from chairs so he could fit. He'd order entire menus, not items from the menu, the entire menu, everything, and then complain he was still hungry. Now, Number 8 on our list died in a way so stupid, it sounds like a Monty Python sketch. King Martin of Aragon, also known as Martin the Humane, which is ironic because his death was anything but dignified. In 1410, Martin had just finished eating an entire goose. Not a portion of goose, an entire goose by himself. His court jester, trying to lighten the mood after this disgusting display of gluttony, told him a joke. The joke? A deer was hanging by its tail from a tree because it had been stealing figs. That's it. That's the whole joke. Not even a good joke. There's no punchline. It's just a mental image of a deer hanging from a tree. But Martin found this so hilarious that he laughed uncontrollably for 3 hours. 3 hours. He laughed so hard he couldn't breathe. His face turned purple. He fell off his chair, and then he died. Imagine being the jester. Your job is to entertain the king, and you accidentally kill him with a mediocre joke about fruit-stealing wildlife. Do you put that on your resume? Successfully made king laughed to death. How do you even explain that to the next king? So what happened to my predecessor? Well, there's a funny story about that. Let's move on to number 7 before I die, laughing at the stupidity. Christian VII of Denmark makes our list not because he was evil, but because he was completely bonkers in the most literal sense. This guy's daily routine was like a greatest hits album of mental illness. He would masturbate excessively, and when I say excessively, his doctors literally prescribed him a special chair to prevent injury. He slapped people randomly, including foreign dignitaries. Middle of a state dinner, slap. Peace negotiations, slap. His own wedding, you guessed it, slap. But wait, it gets weirder. Christian would run through the palace at night smashing furniture and artwork. He'd leap over tables during formal dinners. He once declared his dog a government minister. Not symbolically, he expected people to take orders from the dog. Cabinet meetings must have been interesting. What does Minister Fluffy think about the new tax policy? Woof, excellent point. He also had a habit of playing leapfrog, not with children, not in private, but with foreign ambassadors during official state visits. Imagine being sent to negotiate a treaty, and the king insists on playing leapfrog in the throne room. Do you let him win? Is there protocol for this? What's the diplomatic way to tell a king he's really bad at leapfrog? Number 6 is Emperor Caligula of Rome. And honestly, where do I even start? This guy makes everyone else on this list look well-adjusted. Caligula didn't just have weird habits. He turned weird into an art form. Let's start with his horse in Satis. This wasn't just a beloved pet. Caligula built the horse a marble stable with an ivory manger. The horse had its own servants. It wore a jeweled collar and purple blankets. Purple being the imperial color that regular Romans could be executed for wearing. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that Caligula invited the horse to dinner parties, not to perform, or as entertainment as a guest. The horse would be seated at the table, served wine in golden goblets, and Caligula would have full conversations with it about politics and philosophy. He was planning to make the horse a consul of Rome, essentially a prime minister. Imagine losing a promotion to a horse. Sorry, Marcus, we're giving the position to Entertus. He really impressed us during the interview. Such a stable personality. Caligula also declared himself a god and ordered people to worship him. Fair enough. Lots of emperors did that. But Caligula took it further. He would dress up as different gods and goddesses. Yes, goddesses too. And demand specific worship for each persona. Monday he might be Jupiter. Tuesday, he's Venus. Wednesday, back to being Neptune. He had priests, temples, and even sacrifices made to himself. He'd stand next to statues of gods and ask people which one was more divine. The correct answer, obviously, was Caligula. He also built a floating bridge across the Bay of Naples about 3 miles long, just so he could ride his horse across it, wearing the breastplate of Alexander the Great, which he'd stolen from Alexander's tomb. The bridge served no purpose. It went nowhere useful. He just wanted to ride dramatically across the water, because a soothsayer once said he had as much chance of becoming emperor as he did of riding a horse across the Bay of Naples. Showed him, I guess. Speaking of showing people, number 5 on our list showed everyone way too much. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, also known as the Swan King, or Mad King Ludwig, had an obsession that makes modern Disney adults look restrained. This guy was so obsessed with medieval fairy tales and Wagner's operas that he built multiple fantasy castles, including Neuenstein, the castle that inspired Disney's Cinderella Castle. But here's where it gets weird. Ludwig didn't just build castles. He lived in them like he was the main character of a fairy tale. He'd dress in full medieval costume and demand his servants do the same. He built an artificial cave complete with waterfall and colored lighting, where he'd float in a shell-shaped boat, dressed as Lewin, the Swan Knight. At night, he'd ride around in ornate slides, even in summer, using wheels instead of runners, dressed in full Louis XIV costume. Ludwig was also nocturnal by choice. He'd sleep all day and live at night, having morning rides at midnight and dinner at dawn. His servants had to maintain this schedule, creating an entire nighttime court. He once had a servant's teeth pulled out because the man's false teeth clicked when he talked, disturbing the king's fairy tale atmosphere. But the weirdest habit, he had imaginary dinner parties, full formal dinners with places set for Louis XIV, Marie Antoinette, and other long dead-ad royals. He'd have full conversations with the empty chairs, toasting their health and asking their opinions on modern politics. The servants had to serve the ghosts, refill their glasses, and clear their untouched plates. Imagine being a servant trying to keep a straight face while your boss talks to an empty chair about the Franco-Ressassian War. All right, we're halfway through and I need you to prepare yourself because the weird is about to hit hyperdrive. If you think talking to imaginary dinner guests is strange, wait until you hear about number 4, Ibrahim the Ottoman Empire, also known as Ibrahim the Mad. This guy's habits weren't just weird. They were catastrophically, empire-destroyingly weird. Ibrahim had spent 22 years locked in the cafes, basically a luxury prison for Ottoman princes, convinced he'd be executed any minute. When he finally became sultan, he went absolutely mental with power. His first weird habit, an obsession with fur, not wearing fur, covering everything in fur, the walls, the floors, the ceilings. He'd wrap himself in sable furs, even in the middle of summer in Istanbul. His beard was perfumed with amber, and his clothes were so heavy with fur and jewels that he could barely walk. But that's practically normal compared to his main obsession, large women. And when I say large, Ibrahim took it to an extreme that defies physics. He sent out a decree demanding the fattest woman in the empire be found and brought to him. His agents found an Armenian woman named Sugar Cube, who weighed around 330 pounds. Ibrahim was so delighted that he made her governor-general of Damascus and gave her a massive pension. Then it got darker. Ibrahim became paranoid that his 280 concubines were cheating on him. His solution? He had them all tied in weighted sacks and drowned in the Bosphorus, all 280th in one night. The screams could be heard across the strait. One survived by managing to untie her sack and swim to shore where French sailors rescued her. She lived to tell the tale, which is the only reason we know the horrific details. Number 3 is Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China. And this paranoid control freak makes modern dictators look chill. This is the guy who built the Terracotta Army, united China, and created the foundation for the Great Wall. Impressive resume, also completely insane. Qin Shi was terrified of death, so terrified that he became obsessed with finding the elixir of immortality. He sent out expeditions to find the mythical islands of the immortals. When that didn't work, he turned to alchemy. His court alchemist convinced him that mercury was the key to eternal life. Yes, mercury, the stuff we now know causes madness and death. But Qin Shi didn't just take a little mercury. He chugged mercury pills like they were vitamins. He bathed in mercury. He had rivers of mercury built into his tomb. He was basically marinating himself in one of the most toxic substances known to man, all while wondering why he felt sick all the time. Plot twist. The immortality elixir was killing him. The paranoia got worse as the mercury poisoning progressed. He built a network of tunnels connecting all 270 of his palaces so he could move between them without going outside where assassins might get him. He never slept in the same place twice. Anyone who revealed his location was executed, along with their entire family. He had identical carriages travel in different directions, so no one would know which one he was in. He also burned books, not some books, almost all books that weren't about agriculture, medicine, or prophecy, history, philosophy, poetry, all burned. Scholars who protested, buried alive, 460 of them to be exact. He wanted history to begin with him, so he tried to erase everything that came before. The only reason we know about a lot of ancient Chinese history is because some brave scholars hid books in walls and graves. When he finally died at 49 from shock horror, mercury poisoning, his officials were so scared of what would happen that they hid his death for 2 months. They carried his rotting corpse around in a carriage, surrounding it with carts of rotting fish to mask the smell. Even in death, the emperor's paranoia lived on. Number 2 on our list combined stupidity with gluttony in a way that would be hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. Adolf Fredrik, King of Sweden, died from eating himself to death in one sitting. But this wasn't just overeating. This was Olympic-level gluttony. On February 12th, 1771, Adolf Fredrik sat down for what would be his last meal. He started with lobster, then caviar, then sauerkraut, then smoked herring, then champagne. Lots of champagne. But he was just getting started. The main course included more fish, more meat, more vegetables. Any reasonable person would have stopped there. Adolf Fredrik was not reasonable. For dessert, he had his favorite treat, semler, a Swedish cream bun. He didn't have one. He didn't have 2. He had 14 cream buns after an already massive meal. His servants watched in horror as he stuffed bun after bun into his face, cream dripping down his chin, his stomach visibly distending. Finally, he pushed back from the table, stood up, and immediately collapsed, dead. His official cause of death was listed as digestion problems, which is like saying the Titanic had buoyancy issues. The Swedish people actually called him the king who ate himself to death. It's on his Wikipedia page. Imagine that being your legacy. Not your policies, not your wars, not your achievements. Just ate 14 cream buns and died. His last words were probably worth it, muffled by pastry. But before we get to our number 1 absolute maddest lad of royal insanity, let me ask you something. Are you subscribed? Because I'm about to tell you about a king whose habits were so disgusting, so completely beyond the pale, that historians tried to cover them up for centuries. If you want more absolutely insane historical content that your teachers were too polite to mention, hit that subscribe button right now. And now, number 1, King Henry VIII of England. Yeah, I know, obvious choice. But hear me out, because the stuff you learned in school doesn't even scratch the surface of how completely unhinged this man was. Let's start with the smell. Henry VII had an open, festering wound on his leg that never healed. It was from a jousting accident in 1536 that got infected. The wound would close up, fill with pus, then burst open again. The smell was so bad that courtiers could tell which room he was in from 3 rooms away. They described it as rotting flesh mixed with. His doctors would drain pints of pus from it daily. Pints. And because this was the 1500s, their treatment was to pack it with ground pearls and gold flakes, because apparently infection loves expensive things. The wound was so painful that Henry designed special chairs with leg rests and refused to walk when he could be carried. But that's not even the grossest part. Henry was so fat by the end of his life. We're talking 400 pounds on a 6-foot 2-inch frame that he required a special device to hoist him onto his horse. He couldn't climb stairs. He couldn't fit through normal doorways. Hampton Court Palace had to widen their doors and reinforce their floors because the king kept breaking things with his massive bulk. His eating habits were insane, even by royal standards. A typical breakfast for Henry included a whole chicken, a side of beef, bread soaked in wine, ale, and pastries. That was breakfast. For dinner, he'd have 13 different meat dishes. He'd eat until he vomited, then eat more. His wine consumption was measured in gallons per day. The bedroom situation was even worse. By his final years, Henry was so obese and his legs so infected that he couldn't perform his husbandly duties. He blamed his wives, of course. Anne of Cleves was famously divorced because Henry claimed he couldn't consummate the marriage due to her appearance. The real reason? He was too fat and infected to physically manage it. But here's the truly insane part that historians gloss over. The smell wasn't just from his leg. Henry had what modern doctors believe was type 2 diabetes, which caused his urine to smell sweet and attracted flies. Combined with the infected leg, questionable Tudor hygiene, and his refusal to bathe regularly because he thought it was unhealthy, King Henry VIII was essentially a walking, talking, 400-pound infection. His mood swings were legendary. The head injury from that same jousting accident likely gave him traumatic brain injury, turning an already temperamental king into a paranoid monster. He'd order executions in the morning and forget about them by afternoon. He had 2 of his wives beheaded. One died in childbirth. One he divorced, one survived him, and one he annulled the marriage to. His track record with wives was worse than most people's track record with house plants. The irony. This diseased, stinking, morbidly obese tyrant thought he was God's gift to women. He'd pursue young women at court, convinced they were desperate for his attention. Meanwhile, they were probably just trying not to vomit from the smell. He commissioned portraits that showed him as slim and athletic, even while he was requiring reinforced furniture. When Henry finally died in 1547, he was so large that they needed a special oversized coffin. The coffin was left overnight at Scan House on the way to Windsor. And here's where it gets properly horrific. The lead lining burst from the gases of decomposition, and his bodily fluids leaked out onto the floor. Dogs were found the next morning, licking up the remains of the King of England. Let that image sink in. The man who broke England from the Catholic Church, who declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, who executed anyone who opposed him, ended up as dog food. If that's not karma, I don't know what is. But here's the thing about all these insane royals. They're not just funny stories from history. They're warnings. These were people with unlimited power, unlimited wealth, and zero accountability. And every single one of them went completely mental. Charles V thought he was made of glass. Peter III played with dolls. Farouk became a pickpocket. Martin died laughing at a terrible joke. Christian II slapped diplomats and made his dog a minister. Caligula tried to make his horse a senator. Ludwig the Martyr had dinner parties with ghosts. Ibrahim drowned 280 women in one night. Qin Shi Huang poisoned himself trying to live forever. Adolf Frederick ate himself to death with cream buns. And Henry VIII became a walking biological weapon. The pattern is pretty clear. Give someone absolute power, and they'll absolutely lose their minds. They'll stop bathing, start eating mercury, drown in their own filth, or literally explode from decomposition. So the next time you think your boss is crazy, just remember, at least they're not making you play with dolls until 2 a.m. At least they're not trying to promote a horse to management. At least they bathe more than twice in 72 years. At least they're not governing your country while thinking they're made of glass. These royal nut jobs had everything: Power, money, armies, kingdoms. And what did they do with it? They refused to bathe, thought they were made of glass, died laughing at bad jokes, and tried to make horses into politicians. Actually, looking at modern politics, maybe Caligula was just ahead of his time. At least his horse probably showed up for work. I hope you enjoyed this video. In upcoming videos, I'll try to uncover even more strange findings and back them up with real documents. See you in the next one.